In the deepest depths of Stirling University lies a man who ponders important questions. Not questions like, what's the meaning of life, or why are we here? But questions that center over one concept. How do I scare my audience? Tonight, he will answer that question, reading tales that are so utterly horrifying they may leave you weak at the knees. Welcome to the Spook Zone.
Ladies, gentlemen, other eldritch abominations, I welcome you to the Spook Zone, the weekly show that's actually back now. I will admit I have been not very good at keeping up with scheduling it when it comes to the show. I need to get better at this, but I'm here now. I'm here to really wreck. I'm really here to wreck the sound waves and make some really good horror happen. It's gonna be great. Tonight, I think we're going to just stick with some internet horror stories today. I've not got my Lovecraft with me, and I wish I did have a Poe book, but I do not have an Edgar Allan Poe book on hand. I am currently still trying to find a good, short story author that's been, recognized that are on the same level as those two, but we shall see in time. I wonder if I do find them, that'll be a good day for us. Maybe Stephen King's got something up his sleeve, I don't know. In any case, we are going to begin tonight's stories with a thing called string theory. It's gonna be a good time. It's gonna be a fun one. This one is written by Tesla. That's it, Tesla. Full stop. That's all we're getting for a title, which is fine. In terms of internet names, I can think of way worse. So yeah, let's get on with the show. This is String Theory by Tesla. Enjoy. Have you ever had an experience that suggested someone else was in your house and just thought, I don't want to know, and left it? Sometimes the fear of the unknown just seems like the preferable option than facing a real, concrete danger. Normally it's nothing, though. One time, the beeper function on my wireless house phone just went off when I was the only one home. It could only be called from the living room. Another time, I swear, someone took some change from my desk. But they're all probably just slightly disconcerting tricks of the memory. But what would you do when something truly suggestive happens? Would you run? Or just ignore it, like I did? Last Monday was a normal day. I got up, I brushed my teeth, changed into school clothes, all the little parts of my morning ritual. It seemed like it would be another totally unnoteworthy day. Until I saw the strings. There were 3 or 4 thick twine strings in my room. They crisscrossed between the walls around my bed. One touched the door. No way would I have missed them before. I should have tripped over them. They were tied to pins in the walls, which had also not existed before 10 seconds ago. Nobody could have been in my room while I was in it, let alone set this up. It was early, and my brain wasn't processing correctly. I simply discredited this site, untied the strings, and left to school, leaving them balled up in my desk. It didn't get any better later. Outside my house, there were hundreds of them, tied between houses, around cars, across streets. This had to be some super elaborate prank, one of those hidden camera shows or a comedy improv blog. They clearly had gotten everyone else to play along. Everyone else to play along too. Passers-by were tangled in them, tying them to objects they were walking towards and away from, as if they had been and were continuing to follow the course laid out for them. I nervously continued my journey to school on the bus. Everyone except me was tied to the door. At school, groups of friends were tied to each other. Teachers were tied to their desks and their boards. Oddly enough, at this point, all I could wonder was why I had been left out. When my friend Lucy sat beside me on first period, she simply plonked her bag down on beside my lap and rested her chin in her hand, looking right past me to the window outside. Hey, Lucy. No response. Come on, I didn't expect you to be on this too. She sighed and started taking books from her bag. All the books were tied to her hands. I grinned and yanked one of the strings off a book. She didn't seem to notice, instead simply disregarding the book completely, letting it drop to the floor without a moment's hesitation. I leaned down, picking up her book and placing it on the back of her desk, and she took no notice. Well, if that's how we're going to play it. I smiled, trying to look playful, but really just trying to hide my nervousness. I bundled all the strings attached to it together with one hand, and then pulled them all free. She blinked, turning to stare at me. Holy crap, Martin, you're like a ninja or something. I've been sitting here for maybe 10 minutes. So I smiled again, relieved my friend had finally noticed me. Where did all these strings come from? She grasped, seemingly noticing for the first time. I assumed you were all fucking with me. She stood up, backing into a corner. No one else in the class noticed. They weren't here just a minute ago. Do you see them too? Her tone made it clear that she was genuinely scared. No, didn't you? I was interrupted by my teacher slamming the door behind her. Everyone except me and Lucy murmured a good morning. And still no one seemed to pay either of us any notice. People have been ignoring me all day, I said to Lucy, before turning to our teacher. Hey, Dumpvich, you cannot teach for shit! No reaction. I'm getting away from all this shit. Lucy pulled a few strings aside and left the class. I followed, and surprise, surprise, no one else noticed. We wandered the corridors, leaving and entering classes as we saw fit. Whenever we untied a chair or book from someone else, it was like it just suddenly didn't matter to them. It didn't exist. I showed her the street outside. There were more strings than when I came in this morning, twice as many. We carefully picked our way through the tangle, making our way to a nearby coffee shop. Not particularly grand, I know, but what would you do in our situation? As I said, fear of the unknowns sometimes seemed like the safer option. On a few occasions, I suggested we untie a few more people. Lucy was opposed to it, remembering how terrified she'd been. In the coffee shop, we grabbed a couple sandwiches and drinks from the fridge. We found a table, untied all the strings attached to the chairs, and sat down. We both ate in silence, both of us too scared. Both of us distracting ourselves by watching the strangers in the shop, oblivious to the strings. After 20 minutes, Lucy spoke up. Now she's going to take that sandwich, she said, pointing at a woman across the shop. Sure enough, she walked to the fridge and took a plastic-wrapped sandwich she was tied to. She pays for it and leaves. She did so, according to the prophecies of the strings. That guy doesn't intend to pay. I watched as a man took his coffee and ran out the store, the two servers looking too exasperated to go after him. This is horrible, she whimpered. Let's go, please. Outside wasn't much better. Everyone just followed their strings instructions, going about their daily lives. Lucy announced she was going home to sleep this off, and I agreed to walk her home. She only lived 10 minutes away. Away from the busier part of town, there were fewer strings. It was nicer. We could pretend it wasn't happening. When we turned to Lucy's street, she stopped, her mouth falling open. What now? I broke the silence, my voice sounding surprisingly small. Look! She pointed outside, one of her neighbor's houses. I saw it clearly. And I'll take my memory of that moment till the day I die. A little dark imp, maybe 3 feet tall, walking about on its knuckles on the ground. It was like a monkey. It had 2 bulbous yellow eyes, taking up about half its face, and no mouth or other facial features. It was holding a hammer and a ball of twine, which it was letting out behind it. It walked quickly and quietly from the front door of the house to the mailbox. It stopped, hammered a nail into the side of the box, and tied its string around it. It turned to face us and stopped. When it spotted us, my bottom fell out farther than it had already been. It just started with a look of surprise and curiosity. You could say it was the more frightened one. Suddenly, it beckoned us with its tiny hand. I looked to Lucy. She hadn't moved. I looked back to the imp, which stared at me. I halved the distance between us, and then halved it again. This wasn't fear of the unknown anymore. It was fear of this little guy. It didn't seem like anything to be scared of. When I was a meter away from it, it extended its hand. Hi? I shook it. It nodded in approval, blinking its massive yellow eyes up at me. So, you're the ones in charge of the strings. It nodded, eagerly. I called Lucy over, but she stayed where she was. There are more of you. Another nod. I wanted to ask it so many questions about what it was and where it came from. But it seemed for now I was stuck with only yes or no questions. Do we even have free will? It just looked at me, almost sadly. I immediately felt sick to my stomach and couldn't bear looking at the little monster anymore. I grabbed Lucy, who had been listening to our exchange and now sat on the curb with her head in her hands. Come on. We entered her house, and I made her a cup of tea. When I found her in the living room, she had untied her dog and was curled up with it, crying. I sat the tea down and sat beside her. I'm so scared, she whispered after a good 10 minutes of sobbing. I didn't answer. I couldn't. I'm going to sleep, she mumbled suddenly, and was under within the minute. Sleep was starting to sound pretty good all of a sudden. My eyes suddenly felt like they were being weighed down. I collapsed into the rug. And the last thing I heard before I fell asleep was the scurrying of several sets of little feet nearby. I felt much better the next day, as if the whole affair had been a dream. I'd probably have believed that if I wasn't been awoken by Lucy's mother that morning, wondering what I was doing, sleeping over without permission or something. Over breakfast, Lucy asked why I looked so pale and nervous. I turned to her and smiled, mumbling something to her about feeling sick. But the truth was, I was scared, because I couldn't see any strings, and was wondering whether or not my actions were truly my own. I like that. It was quite well written, apart from a couple of little typos, which I managed to slightly avoid, apart from the bottom one, I think. Let me just see if I can find it. My bottom fell out even further than it had already been. That should have been my bottom jaw, or like my jaw or something like, but no. That's not how it works. But yeah, I quite like that. I don't know if this, like, one problem I always have with sort of stories on the internet is the fact that there's so much, like I don't know, like, I guess the swearing kind of feels out of place. Like, I don't know, I always feel a bit, like, off, like, reading swear words when it comes to these sorts of stories. I'm like, I don't know if I can pull it off, like, with conviction. Like, I'm far too posh voiced to make anything sound like I actually mean to swear. Oh, God, I'm so... Okay, I can't. Oh, I hate it. Anyway, I quite liked that. I think it was a fun story. Yeah, well done, Tesla. I appreciate you. Righto, we are on to our next story now, which is called The White Doors. Comes from an author by the name of Matt Mascia, MASCIA. It's got a pretty high rating on this website, so that's a good start. I believe it was released this year. No, it was released last year. Ooh, and it's very highly rated as indeed. Wow, impressive. Let's have a read, shall we? Da-da-da-da-da-da. Horror in real life doesn't come suddenly. That's the first line. I don't know why I just started reading that without, not even with any music or anything like that. Ugh, ridiculous. I need to get better at this. Yeah, I've been doing this for like 2 years? I'm still terrible. It's great. Anyway, let's read this story. It's The White Doors by Matt Mashia. It's gonna be good, I hope. Hopefully this will be a fun read. Hopefully there won't be any racism I have to avoid, i.e. Lovecraft. That'd be nice. I really enjoy it when my stories aren't like tattered with racial biases and stuff like that. It's good. It's good when a story isn't like, doesn't hate a certain race of people. It's nice. It fills me with joy when a story is actually nice. Let's read. The White Doors by Matt Mashia. Here we go. Horror in real life doesn't come suddenly. It's not a shock or a reactionary scream. Horror in real life is a slow realization that occurs over the course of years. It needs time to mold, decay, spread. True horror is painful, often sad and tragic. It's a slow deterioration, separating you from all forms of comfort and happiness. It's this kind of horror that I have felt ever since I learned of my mother's passing. The circumstances of her death did not make things any easier. It wasn't a slow death with time to make amends, adjust, or say goodbye. She hadn't been fighting a disease or an infection for years. She wasn't old, and nearing the end of her life, her death came for her quickly and unexpectedly. My mother, who after a divorce and my brothers moving away had been living alone, she kept herself busy by working for the church and caring for her parents. My last couple visits home, I had noticed she seemed more fragile than she should for a woman her age. She lost weight and seemed starved for visitors. There was also a look in her eyes that bothered me. They were sleepless, panicked, and broken. It seemed as if she wanted to tell me something but couldn't. Instead, she would just smile sadly and then change the subject. I was told that my brother found her, late one night in October, locked in the downstairs bathroom, naked, lying in her own blood with her wrists sliced open. She was 63 years old. Knowing that suicide is a mortal sin in the Catholic Church, and my mother being a devout Catholic, I couldn't help but wonder if something else was involved in her passing. Not anything scandalous or plotted out, but just something queer and uncomfortable that had been with me and my thoughts since I was a child. It dealt with our family home, and more particularly, the old wooden doors. It all began with trouble sleeping. For as long as I can remember, I had always had trouble falling asleep in my parents' house. My grandmother told me that, as a small child, I was prone to sleep terrors. She would watch me during the day while my parents were at work, and in the evenings, when they went out to dinner, she told me that she was watching me in the night during a bad storm which had hit our neighborhood. A tornado had been spotted that night but never touched down. However, the lightning did claim the house's electricity. My grandmother raced to my bedroom, worried the window facing into my crib would break under the violet wind. But there was something else she was afraid of as well. When my grandmother picked me up from my crib, she said she felt something in the room. Something new, different, and dark. My grandmother, who came to America from Italy as a child, told my parents that she had felt a strange presence that night, and begged them to allow her to do a prayer to remove the Maloik, an old-world superstition. But my parents, who were religious, believed in angels and demons, not folklore. They didn't want to dabble in curses and superstition. As I got older, the sleep terrors continued as nightmares. It wasn't uncommon for me to wake up hours after going to bed, only to be too afraid to fall back asleep. Later in high school, I dealt with my insomnia by not sleeping for days until I could fall asleep quickly. It wasn't until I went away for college that I was able to rest peacefully. I attribute my difficulty sleeping all of those years to the doors in my parents' house. They were big, plain wood doors. Simple, with no additional furnishing or decoration. They seemed ominous, nevertheless. I would spend hours looking at the patterns in the grey and finding shapes and images in them like one would do with clouds. The more I looked, the more I saw, until the images seemed so clear to me. Strange, famished figures, naked, with one leg and half a torso, rabid dogs, an old bearded man. I saw faces, too, wide-eyed, mouths open, sometimes made of knots in the wood. All suffering, as if the spirits of these things had somehow became trapped in the wood. The bathroom door on the first floor was the worst. It was positioned next to the door leading to the basement, and the lock in the doorknob was finicky. It would sometimes get stuck or give way, locking or unlocking by itself. The bathroom door also had one of the strangest designs. In the center of the door, there was what looked like a woman in intense pain, as if she was in labor. Her face was contorted and blurred with vertical lines of grain. Tearing its way out from what I can only imagine has a stomach, in my childlike imagination, was a wide-eyed creature. I would see the bathroom door in my dreams as well. I had terrible nightmares where I was floating and desperately trying to get away from the bathroom, but I was pulled backwards by an invisible force, unable to escape. It would suck me into the darkness of the room. The door would slam shut and lock me in before I would have a chance to wake up, panicked and out of breath. The nightmares and the lack of sleep only made my already active imagination worse. The strange images in the door weighed on me. There was a door in every room of the house. I could not escape them. They were a constant presence, staring out at me from the wooden veneers. As a child, I began to see other things that found a way out of the trappings of wooden frames, not things I could look at directly, but rather things that appeared in my peripheral vision. The kinds of things that are always begged to be questioned. Was someone there? Or was my imagination getting the best of me? Over time, I got better at being watchful and looking without shifting my gaze. One night when I was 6 years old, I went into my parents' bedroom feeling guilty that I wasn't yet asleep. I needed to be reassured and comforted because I had scared myself badly. My mother gave me a hug and asked what was wrong, and I told her that I could see things out of the corners of my eyes. She asked me about their appearance, but I couldn't get a good look at them. As soon as I turned my head, they were gone. She asked me when was the last time I had seen one. I told her that there was one now with us in the corner of the room. My mother looked to what to her was an empty corner in the bedroom. She told me that maybe there were angels sent by God to watch and protect me, but they weren't. Something in the pit of my stomach would turn, and I would feel sick around them. They were motionless beings, staring blankly at me, only moving when I wasn't looking, slowly getting closer to me every time I looked away. I'd first discovered them in my peripheral vision outside my bedroom on the stairs, late at night when I couldn't sleep. I would notice a dark shape peeking over the top stair, eyes glistening where nothing should be. I would try and quickly shift my gaze to refocus on them, but they were always gone. I'd eventually look away and then find them again at my bedroom door. And then even closer at my desk, ever present, just outside of sight. I decided that they must be demons. Not the red horde demons from cartoons, but something else. They seemed old, as if they were somehow misplaced, out of time. At night, when I would see them, I would be too afraid to move or do anything but stare blankly, not giving them a chance to move in closer. Sometimes, I would hear them talk to me in my head. They would tell me to do things like wait in the corner of the room, or flood my mind with images of strange, exotic places. I would sometimes do what they said, though nothing ever came of it. My mother panicked one afternoon when she couldn't find me. She searched the entire house, eventually finding me in the bedroom closet, facing the wall where the voices had told me to wait. She was in tears when I told her about the voices. She brought me a rosary and asked if the demons were the reason I had trouble sleeping. Eventually, my father blessed the house with holy water, room by room, as part of the celebration of the Epiphany, recommended every year by the church. It was after this, when I was still seeing them, that my mother became bothered by my demons and their doors. It began to weigh on her as well. I grew up in a suburb just outside of Cleveland in a working-class neighborhood, predominantly made out of Irish, Italians, and Slovenians, where religion was very much a part of life. My parents were passionately involved in the church, as well, and it was through them that I learned to take the sightings I was hearing very seriously. Instead of denouncing my demons as part of my imagination, my fears were reinforced, and their existence confirmed through the power of faith and community. One night, we had a priest, who was new to the parish, over to our house to meet the family. After dinner, he asked me if there was anything I wanted to ask God for. I told him that there are demons in this house that hide in the doors, and I wanted them to go away. My parents shared a look of concern, as my mother tried to explain. The priest looked at the doors before he left and assured me everything was okay. Later that evening, he spoke with my parents, and something was settled between adults. A couple of months later, my father did a small home renovation, which included replacing all of the doors with white ones. It was relieving for the doors to be finally gone, and I thought that I would be now rid of the strange creatures and be able to sleep, but it was too late. My mother told me that she was having the nightmares now as well. Something about the doors, they would say. As I got older, I read about the possessions of objects, like the Annabelle doll, and how the Native Americans believed in evil wood spirits called Wakakuna. But I mostly ignored the demons, and I eventually stopped seeing them. Despite my mother's wishes, I no longer went to church, and I refused to talk about religious matters or anything involving the strange thing I had seen and felt in the house. I told myself the horrors I faced as a child were due to my overactive imagination and strict religious upbringing. By the time I left for college, there had been no talk of doors, demons, or nightmares for a long time, although I would occasionally get that sick feeling in my stomach late at night when I was near the downstairs bathroom door. My parents would later divorce, my mum keeping the house and working at the church. I moved away for work in the Twin Falls. It wasn't until my dad called to tell me about circumstances of my mother's passing that I began to wonder if something more had happened to my mother. I made the trip home to find that my childhood neighborhood that had been hit hard by the recession. It was now only a faded memory of the town I grew up in. The corner ice cream parlor was now a get cash fast land, and the streets were relatively empty and bleak. Houses were boarded up, and my old high school had closed. Parked at a red light, I watched the traffic lights signal to empty streets. My parents' house even looked different. Old, and not as well kept as it was when my father had lived there. The grass had been overrun with weeds, and the siding was dirty. We stood in front of the house that afternoon after the funeral, my brothers, father, and I. My brothers explained to me how my mom had been stressed. Her mood swings had been violent and her sleeping pattern was erratic. She would go for long periods of time without sleeping, and then fall asleep into a deep one for days. My brother told me how late one evening after work he had gone over to her mother's house to check on her, and it had been 2 or 3 in the morning by the time he had arrived and let himself in, finding our mother in the kitchen, making breakfast. He told me that she had been confused about the time and thought it was morning. He explained that she was trying different medications to help with the insomnia, and the doctors had thought the mood swings and suicide could have been a side effect. I told them how I used to have trouble sleeping in our house, and I remembered about the demons and the doors. They laughed. They were too young to remember. I told them that I thought I was going to sleep better after my dad had replaced the doors, but it wasn't until college that I slept well. My dad stopped me and told me that he had never replaced the doors. He just painted them white. Oof. Oof. I am sorry, sir. That is a hard one. Oof. What what was that? Sorry about that. Anyway, that was a really good story. Very well written. The way it describes and the way it details was really good. My only criticism would be that it feels a little bit like, I don't know, a lot of things seem like assumptions. Like it would just like it. I feel like the story would work well if we got a better picture of who the author was talking to, because like characters like the grandmother and that are they're just talked about and then left. Like we don't like the brothers aren't mentioned for an entire until the very end. Basically, it feels like a lot of the information in this thing is very like it feels that pieces of information are just kind of like thrown in there, and you're just supposed to say, "Oh, yep, that makes sense." They were there the whole time. I think it could have been like introduced better. Basically, I think its information could have been structured a little bit better. But apart from that, I liked that a lot. It was very fun. Yeah, cool as ice. I think we have time for one more story, unless we manage to finish this next one quick, and I can get another one up. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, that was unfortunate. I apologize. Yeah. Let's read another one. This one comes from Reddit, actually. It's great. Everybody loves Reddit. Reddit, the only site where. That's a good one. You should use that tagline, Reddit. That's the one that you should use. Yes. Anyway, this comes from the No Sleep subreddit, which is like the horror story part of the site. It's really good. If you're looking for new and exciting artists and writers who like to write spooky things, go there. It's good. In any case, I have a story here called "I Can See People's Auras, and It's a Curse." This one is by a fella or lady, can't tell because it's literally just a bunch of letters and numbers. It's called A10A10A10. Really good username. I like it a lot. Yes. God, that's good. Jeez. Blech. Okay. Right. Let's read this thing. I have a good feeling about this. Here we go. This is I can see people's auras, and it's a curse. Here we go. Yes, I can see people's auras. And I hate saying it so bluntly. It makes me sound like some hack psychic who fakes the ability as a means of exploitation and a paycheck. I've never made money from my ability. I've never taken advantage of it. And until now, I've never spoken of it to anybody. But I really do see them. And I'm starting to view it more of a curse. I have reason for typing this out, and I assure you, there isn't a happy ending. For me, it's quite simple. I see a faint light surrounding people, everyone, and in that light I can see their morality. The brighter and more translucent the light is, the better the person. The darker and opaquer, the worse. Dim and partly translucent are morally ambiguous. To simplify things, those are the ways I've described them. Dark equals evil, bright equals good, dim equals somewhere in between. It's strange. I have always viewed the people with grey, dim auras as arbiters, mediators, people in the in-between, who aren't one or the other, and will always have the difficult decisions to make. I was a child when I first became aware of my gift. It didn't take long to figure out that the brighter auras were kinder to me and selfless. And while both my parents were good people, my father's aura was quite a bit brighter than my mother's. As a result, he was always far more patient and understanding with me. It was clear that to see that my teachers and fellow students with brighter auras were usually friendlier and more compassionate. The dark auras were the stereotypical fighters, lunch money stealers, and bullies. I would say that I was around 8 years old when I fully figured out that I have the gift that most people don't have, that possibly no one else has. I've read some of the New Age websites and alternative medicine articles that give their take on aura reading. While I believe the vast majority of it is bullshit, I expect that there must be at least some other people out there with my ability, so I don't want to completely dismiss those people as an outright hoax. It's just that for me, it doesn't work like anything the way those websites describe. I've always visited numerous aura readers and psychics. Most of them have pretty dim or dark auras themselves, and I'm certain they don't really hold to this power. I'm not saying that all psychics are terrible people. I visited a few who had very bright auras. They just weren't able to convince me that they really have psychic powers, but they at very least used the deception to try and help people. You need to understand. I'm going to end this entry by sharing a terrifying event that's happening to me. But before I get to that, I think there are a few more things I need to explain. I imagine many of you people are curious as to what type of aura is the most common. I'm happy to tell you that the majority of people are between dim and bright. I see very few dark auras. And this isn't scientific, and I haven't travelled around the world plotting out charts and graphs, but I assume around 60% of people are brightish, around 25% dimmish, leaving around just 15% darkish. But again, these are just estimates. What's the precise difference between, say, bright and dim? I have no idea. But rest assured, there's far more bright in the world than dark. The next thing I'd like to discuss is children. I can see an aura's I can see a person's aura right from birth, and I've never encountered an aura as changing as someone ages. And I'm not sure what this means for the whole nature versus nurture debate. And I'm not saying that everyone with a dark aura always behaves terribly, or vice versa. A person with a bright aura might be born in horrible conditions, acquire a drug problem, and then resort to thievery to feed their addiction. I think the difference is a thief with a bright aura, with a horrible upbringing, may rob someone, but they would never intentionally hurt someone in the process. A dark aura, they'd kill someone if they could get away with it. No second thoughts. Another interesting note, I find that the ratio between bright, dim, and dark to be similar across pretty much all human activities. When I'm at a church or a death metal concert, it always seems to be around that same 25 to 15 ratio. I once visited a federal prison and was shocked to see that at least half of the prisoners had bright auras. I had to be at the prison in person to actually see this, because I can't see auras in photographs, but television shows, movies, or even mirrors. I can only see auras in the real world. Another strange thing, I can't see my own aura. I assume and hope I would be on the brighter spectrum, but I can't see it. The brightest person I ever worked as a social... The brightest person I ever saw worked as a social worker. She shone so bright. It was difficult for me to even look at her. And based on the way that people acted in her presence, I think that almost everyone around her could sense her brightness in like a subconscious way. Everyone loved her. She donated a kidney to someone she barely even knew. She had special needs she had a special needs adopted child. Most of the money she earned was donated to various charities. And that's only the little I knew of her. This woman shine so brightly, but she was scary to me. It was scary that someone could be so good. But it wasn't as nearly as scary as the darkest person I ever saw. I was 20 years old at the time, leaving a club downtown at 2 a.m. A man quietly walked down the street. I didn't see him at first, but noticed the light dimming around me. The man was so dark that he partly absorbed the light around him. I looked at him for a long time. He looked desperate, cruel, callous. When he looked up and locked eyes with me, it made me fall back. He smirked, as though he knew what I could see. I saw his face up close. I would never forget it. And I recognized it when I saw his mugshot a few weeks later in the newspaper. He had murdered his ex-wife and 2 children in cold blood. I think I need to get to it now. The reason why I'm writing this out. I fell in love a year ago. She didn't shine anywhere near as bright as what I'd seen before, but she was most assuredly not dark. She wasn't even dark or dim. She was beautiful. Her sense of humor, her wit, her everything. She was my dream woman. And I've never told her anything at all about the auras I see. I could go into far more about her. But this isn't a love story. What's most important is this. We fell in love. She got pregnant. We got married. We were happy. We were so happy. I remember hearing the buzz of my phone 2 mornings ago. I remember my excitement when I saw it's happening. Come to the hospital. I remember my frustration when I got in traffic. I remember how long it took for me to find a parking spot. I remember shouting at a nurse, "What room is my wife in?" I remember bursting through a door, seeing the smile on my wife's face. I remember seeing the doctor, his light shining so bright, and he told me, "Congratulations, it's a boy." The doctor held him up to me. And all the light in the room disappeared. No, this can't be. I remember saying. The doctor put him in my arms. The darkness around my son was so absolute I could barely even see him. He was a void. He was so dark that the world barely existed around him. It was like nothing I'd ever experienced. I started weeping. I think my wife and the doctor thought they were tears of joy, but they weren't. Lord knows they weren't. I think back to the dark outline around that man that murdered his family. It was up to that point the darkest I've ever seen, but the darkness around my son was 100 times worse, 1,000 times worse. And what could possibly be 1,000 times worse than murdering your entire family? It's been 2 days. We're home now. My son's darkness is so extreme that it dims the whole way leading to his room. My wife knows something is wrong. I think she suspects I'm having regrets about having children at all. If only she knew. What do I do? He's my son. Just 20 minutes ago, I stood above him, holding a pillow over his face, but I couldn't do it. Not yet, anyway. A man who could murder his 2-day-old baby boy. What color would his aura be? And here's the thought that keeps going through my mind as I sit here alone. The fathers of our worst, the Adolf Hitlers, the Joseph Stalins, the Timothy McVeighs, if their fathers knew what they would become, would they murder them? The cradle, would they have the strength to hold down the pillow as long as it takes? I can see the door of my son's room in the office. The hallway seems to be growing darker. I look down at my hands as I type this. Maybe I'm going crazy. But there seems to be an aura around my hands and arms now. It's grey. It's dim. Maybe it's always been dim. I'm looking down at the pillow beside me. The greyish dim around my hands more apparent than ever. Maybe it's time. Maybe this is why I have this gift. It all comes down to right now. Maybe it's time. I think it's time. Oh, that's a good concept. It's a bit. I don't know if ooh, ha hee ha hoo ha ha wa 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 wa. Is really good. Is really good. Is really good. I like it a lot. I don't know if I agree with the philosophy of it, but in terms of being written, really well done. You get a really good picture of this character. He seems a little bit neurotic and a little bit like I can see all these people and wow. Oh, it's so it's good. Oh, it's good. Oh, it's good. Oh, it's really good. I like it a lot. It's really fun. Please, yes. Oof. A10, A10, A10. You did a good job. That's a fun story. I enjoyed that immensely. Yes. Oh. Now I've got 15 minutes left, and I'm trying to figure out what I can read in this time. I didn't expect that story to be both so short and yet so good. Dang, oh darn. I need to see if I can find a story real quick. I'm going to see if I can snoop around the No Sleep subreddit for a little bit. Alright, let's see. Looking for a story that lasts 15 minutes. Alright, let's go for this one. Yeah, this looks fun. This guy didn't stop laughing for 10 years. It's by Nisa Assassin. Nisa Assassin. It's a bit of a oddly spelt username, but it's okay. We can all have weird usernames sometimes. It's fine. It's okay. I'm not mad. Let's read this story about this guy who doesn't stop laughing. This guy didn't stop laughing for 10 years. By Nisa Assassin. Here we go. He ate while laughing, he defecated while laughing, he actually slept, though fitfully awaking every hour or so, laughing. For a few of my co-workers, he was the only fun part of the day, but he terrified me. This was probably because I was the new guy, the green psych tech, who still thought he could make a difference. Apparently most psych techs, that's psychiatric technicians, lose their compassion barometer after a while, and eventually a patient who spends every waking moment laughing is no longer disturbing because he seems harmless. He terrified me also because, for some inexplicable reason, there was something familiar about him. To this day, my family still doesn't understand exactly what my role as a psych tech was. It's simple. Keep crazy people from killing themselves or others. But what do I do all day on the job? Well, sometimes I sit in a chair, watching some insane person lie in a bed in a small white room, and if they become agitated, I would lock the door. Sometimes I'd lead art hour, and we'd paint, or we'd make paper mache. No scissors allowed, of course. Sometimes I turn on a yoga video for exercise hour. And sometimes I pin psychotic maniacs down so that my co-workers could apply their restraints, and the nurse would inject 2 mg of lorazepam right in the gluteus, I should say. I never got used to it. I kept caring. And that's why I only lasted a year. The laughing man laughed me right out that acute psych ward. Allow me to explain this. There isn't much that's funny about mental illness. And I don't mean to be insensitive or flippant about psychosis, about how it can rip the individual and their families apart. But to my fellow psych techs, many of them at least, It was all that is all that those patients were. They were psychos, crazies, maniacs, quote. I tried to see them as people. They were people. And they are people. And their illness isn't the only thing that defines them, but in the acute psych ward, their illness is in full swing. And it's the only sight that psych techs like me saw of them. They were mostly bipolar patients in the height of their manic phase, or schizophreniacs having mental breaks. The laughing guy, I'll call him Aaron, was a schizophrenic in his early 50s with an atypical form of catatonia. Most catatonic schizophrenics will sit motionless, staring off for days without eating or sleeping. I recall one patient who would stand in the middle of the room, maintaining an impossible pose for several days. When his catatonia subsided, this patient explained that during those frozen moments he fully believed that if he moved, the world would end. But, as in Aaron's case, his psychiatrist explained this to me. Some catatonics don't remain motionless, but have repetitive, purposeless motions or actions. And Aaron's catatonic expression was laughing. Non-stop. Aaron had been in and out of the psych ward for years, alternating between the state mental hospital and the local hospital, for there was some legal stipulations that didn't allow him to stay in a long-term facility. Later, I found out that because no facility could handle his laughing for more than a few months at a time. When I started my job, Aaron had already been in the psych ward for over 3 months, but according to some of the seasoned psych techs, he had been laughing like this for over 10 years. Like I mentioned, most psych techs found him amusing, and more than once I saw a psych tech putting his arm around Aaron, laughing with him, mocking the way his high-pitched, almost screeching laugh nervously drowned out any conversation in the room. But Aaron took no notice of them when they did this. His eyes looked straight through anyone who faced him, and he kept pacing in place when a tech tried to hold him, like there was some motor inside him, never shut off. He paced all day like this. And to get him to eat, I'd have to pace with him, placing bits of food in his mouth as we went. We scheduled bathroom breaks from every hour so he didn't have to change his clothes. And this worked 50% of the time. All the while, his laugh, he laughed his piercing, frantic laugh. It grated on me. Only after a week of being there, I dreaded going up on those elevators, greeted by his incessant laugh as I entered that dismal psych ward. Aaron wasn't the most frightening patient I had that year. The stories I could tell. But perhaps the strangest, maybe even the most tragic, certainly the most personal. I understood that most catatonics had progressive, worsening schizophrenia until they just shut off. But it killed me to know why this guy just started laughing, and no one knew why. Before I quit, I asked nearly everyone about his story, and no one knew. Until I met Dr. Greenwald, an ancient psychiatrist who hadn't worked at the psych ward for years. I'd heard stories of the doctor, and from what I gathered, he was a kind, highly esteemed man who loved what he did, who didn't judge these tormented patients. Dr. Greenwald was probably my strongest inspiration to become a physician myself, and to this day, I remember the compassion he showed patients. The older nurses loved him. And when he found out that he was taking a break from his private outpatient practice to round occasionally in the acute psych ward, they were all thrilled. Meeting Dr. Greenwald actually exceeded my expectations, and I admired how he valued every interaction, genuinely caring about each person in front of him. Even lowly psych techs like me. One night, a few weeks before I quit, I saw Dr. Greenwald exiting Aaron's room after his evaluation, and I had the feeling he would have answers about Aaron, answers about how he came to the way he was. Graciously, he told me, as I've mentioned in a previous post, that there are many things I've seen in my career in medicine that don't make a lot of sense. So many things that bother me until this day. Aaron's case is yet another case in point. I'll never forget his story. The first time Dr. Greenwald met Aaron in the hospital, he recognized a few things. Aaron was good-natured, a caring guy who not surprisingly loved to laugh, and make others laugh. Dr. Greenwald remembered him, capturing audiences, telling the most hilarious stories that would have had the whole room in fits. He hadn't had an easy life, but he weathered his burdens well, easily laughing at life's ironies, both big and small. Dr. Greenwald was unaware of any previous psychiatric history, though Aaron had married a beautiful woman who suffered from lifelong depression and anxiety, and because Aaron had such a strong desire to care for troubled people, these feelings drew him to his wife. Aaron wanted to fix her, and through it all, he fell in love with her. She quickly became pregnant after they were married, and in time gave birth to a healthy baby boy. Her mental illness worsened after the birth, thought to be postpartum depression, and Aaron became nearly obsessed with the study of psychology. Despite his efforts to fix her, she deteriorated, developing postpartum psychosis. And she began hearing voices telling her to do violent things. Everything changed when Aaron found his wife had killed his infant son. He hadn't smothered him or drowned him, but had eaten him. Upon hearing this, Aaron started laughing and never stopped. After Dr. Greenwald finished the story, I sat there, speechless, then in silence, as Aaron's shrill laugh emanated from his hospital room. Dr. Greenwald sat there with me, and I caught a glimpse of emotion on his face. "Isn't it odd," I finally said, "that he broke completely all of a sudden? I thought most catatonics have a long history of schizophrenia or something." I felt like an idiot as soon as my words left my mouth. Clearly, Aaron had some mental disorder to have been a patient of Dr. Greenwald's. Dr. Greenwald smiled at me like a loving grandfather. "Some things are just too much for a human mind to handle. I guessed that something was so tragic could just make anybody snap." "What was his diagnosis when you met him, sir?" I asked. He looked at me, puzzled. "What do you mean? When you met him, what were you treating him for?" "Son, he wasn't my patient." He paused. "Aaron was a psych tech here. I worked with him for years. I was here the day his wife was brought in, strapped to the stretcher. That baby's blood covering her face and clothes. She was completely psychotic, uncontrollable. Aaron was working here that day." I gaped at him, my mouth open, and all I managed to squeak out was a bewildered, "What?" Dr. Greenwald sighed heavily. I imagine that Aaron knew he was about to lose his mind then. And suddenly he became what he tried so hard to fix. The irony was, I guess, too much. He just had to laugh. Dr. Greenwald stood up and patted me on the shoulder. He had stayed much longer than he expected to, and I slowly stood up, watching him walk away. As he exited the secured door, he turned to me and said, "Strangely, you remind me of him," but before he, started laughing. "You care a lot about these people, I can tell. They're lucky to have you." Mortified, it suddenly washed over me. The realization nearly drowning me. There was something so intimate and familiar about Aaron, and I could never explain it to even myself. I saw a piece of me in that lifeless shell of a man, the laughing, insane man. I had no response for Dr. Greenwald in that moment, but bursting from my lungs came a terrifying, totally involuntary laugh. I turned in my resignation notice that same day. Woof. Woof, ba woof. That is harsh. Jeez. Ishk. Ah, ooh, ah, ee, ah. Ooh, That was grim. That was very sad and very good and very scary and just all the right places. That was nice. I'm glad I read that. And it's 10 o'clock on the dot. Haha. Oh god. Oh, and I'm scared of laughing. Great. Thanks, story. Cool. Yeah. 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 It's really good. I like that a lot. That's fun. Thank you all for watching the Spook Zone. I have been your host. Hopefully you've enjoyed this. If you did, tune in next week. I'll be back again and reading some more spooky stories for you. Who knows, I may even read one of my own one of these days. Whenever that'll happen. I cannot promise you when. Probably the end of this year, I'd say. Probably the last show of this semester will probably be a self-made one. I want that to be the case. Anyway, thanks again for listening. Yeah. I can't say anything else. But there is one thing. Above all things that I must say. Above all. Stay spooked. Oh, ghosts. Oh, God, they're everywhere. They're eating my brains. Oh, no.